My name is Ainsley Carter. I'm 41 years old, and I learned the hard way that even your own blood can turn against you. It happened on a cold morning in April 2024 inside a family courtroom in Portland, Oregon, where I was fighting for custody of my 10-year-old son, Lucas. My daughter has never been reliable, my mother, Linda Carter, announced confidently from the witness stand. Your Honor. She jumps from job to job, she's constantly anxious, and I honestly don't believe she's capable of raising a child on her own. I sat at the respondent's table, hands trembling slightly in my lap, wearing a charcoal gray suit I'd bought secondhand just for this hearing. My ash blonde hair was tied into a neat bun, though a few loose strands brushed my cheeks whenever my heart pounded too hard. Even after 2 years divorced, a pale indentation remained where my wedding ring had been glowing under the harsh fluorescent courtroom lights, like a reminder of everything I'd survived. Across from me sat my ex-husband, Daniel Roth, relaxed with his hands folded, a smug smile etched on his face. His attorney, sharp, polished, and expensive, nodded along to every word my mother used to dismantle me. She can't offer Lucas any stability. My mother continued, her voice stronger now. She disappears for hours, says she's working, but she never explains what she actually does. She lives in a tiny loft above a bakery in Old Town, drives a 15-year-old car, and barely manages her bills. In the front row, my son Lucas sat beside my younger brother Michael. Lucas's small hands twisted nervously in his lap as he looked at me, confusion clouding his brown eyes. Michael stared straight ahead, avoiding my gaze, his silence cutting deeper than any of my mother's words. They didn't know the truth. For the past 7 years, I worked under sealed federal and state judicial investigations, quietly climbing the ranks of the legal system. I began as a legal analyst for the Attorney General's Special Investigations Unit before being appointed as a circuit court judge at 31 and later to the Oregon Supreme Court at 33. But I never told my family, not because I was ashamed, but because confidentiality laws and federal security protocols required it. To them, I worked at the courthouse. They never asked anything more. I spent nights studying bank statements, tracing shell companies, gathering evidence. Then woke up before dawn to pack Lucas's lunch, braid his hair, and walk him to school. I was not absent. I was simply unseen. Meanwhile, my mother said Daniel has a stable income, a 4-bedroom house in West Haven, and a proper support system. Lucas deserves that, not secrets and instability. Judge Marianne Ellison sat expressionless behind the bench. We'd known each other professionally for over a decade, but now her face revealed nothing, only duty. And then my mother delivered the final blow. For all we know, she said, pressing a hand to her chest like she was the victim, Ainsley could be involved in something illegal. She refuses to tell us where she works. I fear for my grandson's safety. A hush swept the courtroom. Then whispers. Disbelief. Judgment. Daniel's family sat on the left side of the gallery, nodding with satisfied approval. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. Not because I was guilty, but because the truth I carried was heavier and more dangerous than all of their lies. My side of the courtroom looked nearly empty, just 3 close friends sitting quietly behind me. They were the few people who truly knew what I did for a living, and more importantly, why I couldn't defend myself the way everyone expected me to. Across the aisle, the benches were full. My ex-husband, Daniel Roth's family, his co-workers, his church friends, all nodding along with the case against me. Daniel's attorney, James Crawford, stood and addressed the court with smooth confidence. Your Honor, the testimony today clearly demonstrates that the child's best interests would be served by awarding full custody to my client. The mother's lack of transparency about her employment, her inconsistent lifestyle, and her history of emotional instability raise grave concerns regarding her capacity to parent. I sat silently, hands folded, expression calm. 10 years working behind the scenes in the justice system had trained me well. Sometimes the most powerful move is to wait. Ms. Carter, Judge Marianne Ellison said, turning her attention to me. How do you respond to these allegations about your employment and your ability to provide a stable home for your son? I stood slowly, not rushed, not defensive, just certain. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, I would like to call a witness to address those concerns. Daniel's lawyer frowned. Your Honor, the respondent did not submit any witnesses on the docket. The witness was unavailable until this morning, I replied smoothly. But I believe his testimony will clarify everything. A pause. Then Judge Ellison nodded. Very well. Call your witness. I walked to the courtroom doors and opened them. In stepped a man in a black tailored suit, tall with silver hair and quiet authority, the kind of presence that makes people stand without being asked. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Your Honor, I said clearly, I call Chief Justice Jonathan Pierce of the Oregon State Supreme Court to the stand. The audible gasp that followed was undeniable. My mother froze, confidence draining from her face. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer blinked rapidly, already reaching for his notes. Chief Justice Pierce was sworn in. I stepped forward. Chief Justice Pierce, I said in a professional tone I hadn't used in months, can you please identify me for the record? He looked directly at me, his expression steady. You are Justice Ainsley Carter, Associate Justice of the Oregon State Supreme Court, where you have served honorably for the past 8 years. Silence. Every breath in that room seemed to stop. And Your Honor? I continued. Could you describe the nature of my responsibilities? Justice Carter, he said, now addressing the court, presides over some of the state's most complex appellate cases. She serves on the Judicial Review Board for ethics violations, contributes to federal constitutional hearings, and has authored multiple landmark decisions regarding family law and child protection. I saw Lucas, my son, sitting straighter, eyes wide. Shock, then pride. Daniel's lawyer's hands trembled on his papers. My mother stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. One final question, I said. Could you speak to concerns regarding my financial stability? Chief Justice Pierce nodded. Justice Carter earns an annual salary of $198,000 along with judicial benefits, pension contributions, and federal security clearance. Financial instability is not and has never been a concern. The courtroom was silent. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they finally knew who I really was. She owns her apartment downtown, a penthouse to be exact, and she also maintains a vacation home in the Cascade Mountains. Her financial disclosures, like all state justices, are publicly accessible, Chief Justice Pierce concluded. A low wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. I turned to face the gallery. My mother sat frozen, her lips parted, shock, replacing the cold confidence she had carried minutes before. Everything she had said about me, the instability, the poverty, the shame, was unraveling right in front of her. Your Honor, I said, facing Judge Ellison again, if I may, I'd like to explain why my family was unaware of my position. Judge Ellison nodded. Proceed. Justice Carter. 8 years ago, when I was appointed to the Oregon State Supreme Court, I made a decision, one not out of shame, but protection. I chose to separate my professional life from my personal one, I said. Not because I was embarrassed of my work, but because I wanted my son Lucas to have a normal childhood without reporters, without pressure, without being treated differently because of my title. I glanced at Lucas. His small face held astonishment and pride. That's why I continued living modestly. I drive a 12-year-old Subaru. I shop at thrift stores sometimes. I bring home takeout when I'm too tired to cook. I wanted my son to understand gratitude, humility, and effort, not entitlement. Across the aisle, Daniel Roth stared at me as though seeing me for the first time in his life. All those times he mocked my boring courthouse job. I said, my voice steady. He never asked. Not once. I continued. The reason I was sometimes absent from school events wasn't negligence. It was because I was overseeing death penalty appeals, child protection cases, and constitutional reviews. Because I was writing decisions that shaped laws for millions of people across this state. Chief Justice Pierce spoke up again. If I may add, Justice Carter is one of the finest judicial minds I've had the honor to serve with in my 30 years on the bench. Her rulings have been upheld in federal courts and cited nationwide. I walked back to my table not as a defendant, but as who I truly was: a judge, a mother, a woman who had spent 15 years protecting children and families in courtrooms just like this one. Your Honor, I said quietly yet firmly, I have removed children from abusive homes. I have fought to place them in safe, loving environments. I have written opinions that changed the way custody laws operate in this very state. The courtroom was silent. The claim that I am unfit to care for my own son is not only false, it is a direct insult to every child, every mother, every family I have fought for in this courtroom. I turned to my mother. What hurts the most, I said, is that the people making these accusations never bothered to ask me what I actually do. They assume the worst, because it was easier than knowing the truth. Daniel's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, we had no knowledge of what I asked sharply. That your client was married to a state Supreme Court justice for 6 years and never once cared enough to find out what she actually did for a living. Judge Ellison leaned forward, and the courtroom held its breath. If this moment left you holding your breath, don't leave just yet. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the judge speaks, and the truth finally decides who wins this family battle. Mr. Crawford, Judge Ellison said, turning toward Daniel's lawyer, did your client truly not know his wife's profession during their marriage? James glanced at Daniel. Daniel swallowed, voice cracking. She said she worked at the courthouse. I thought she was a clerk. A hush fell over the room. The absurdity of it was staggering. I had been married to a man for 6 years who never once questioned why I worked 12-hour days, brought home appellate case files, thicker than dictionaries, or traveled for judicial ethics conferences. He never asked. He simply assumed. Your Honor, I said calmly, I would like to submit into evidence my judicial performance evaluations, my annual financial disclosure statements, and the custody evaluation conducted by Dr. Alexandra Reed, a court-appointed child psychologist. Judge Ellison took the folders from the clerk, flipping through them with practiced efficiency. Dr. Reed evaluates you as an excellent parent, she said. Strong emotional connection with your child, no concerns regarding safety, stability, or caregiving ability. I nodded slightly and let my gaze drift around the courtroom. To my mother, Linda, who sat rigidly unable to meet my eyes. To my sister, Karen, whose face was pale with shame. To Daniel, staring at the floor, realization hitting far too late. And finally to Lucas, sitting on the bench with his hands folded, looking at me, not with confusion this time, but with pride. Your Honor. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I have spent my career making decisions in the best interests of children. I have seen families torn apart by greed, ego, and assumptions. I will not let that happen to my son. I took a breath. I am requesting full physical custody of my son, Lucas Carter Roth. I request supervised visitation for his father until he completes co-parenting and child welfare courses. Additionally, I request that extended family members who presented misleading or false testimony be excluded from future legal discussions regarding custody. Judge Ellison folded her hands. Given the overwhelming evidence, the stability of Justice Carter's household, and the troubling testimony from certain family members, I am granting full custody to Justice Ainsley Carter. Mr. Roth will be granted supervised visitation for 6 months, subject to review upon completion of court-ordered classes. The gavel struck once. As the courtroom emptied, Lucas ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Mom, why didn't you tell me you were a judge? I knelt so we were eye level. Because I wanted you to love me for being your mom, not for what I do. He grinned. I still think it's kind of awesome. Do you send people to jail? Sometimes, I said softly, but mostly I help families figure out how to take care of each other. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ainsley. I didn't know. I stood one arm around Lucas. No, Mom. You testified under oath that I was unfit. You were willing to take my child away without ever asking the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was helping. You were trying to win, I said quietly. And you forgot we're supposed to be raising a child, not fighting a war. Daniel said what he needed to say to get custody, I said quietly but firmly. And you believed him, instead of your own daughter. The courtroom was nearly empty now, only a few observers, scattered relatives, and the sound of shuffling papers being packed into briefcases. I turned to face my mother. For years you asked what I did for work, and I gave you vague answers because I wanted privacy. You never pushed further. You never asked because you wanted to know me, you asked so you could judge me. And when I didn't brag, you assumed that meant I had nothing to be proud of. My gaze shifted to my sister Karen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I became a judge at 31, I said, voice steady. One of the youngest in state history. I've written rulings that are studied in law schools. I have fought for families, protected children, and devoted my life to fairness and justice. From the gallery, Chief Justice Jonathan Pierce approached with quiet dignity. Ainsley, he said, his voice warm but authoritative, do not let today discourage you from the work you do. If anything, let it remind you why it matters. Thank you, Chief Justice, I replied. It has. As we stepped out into the marble hallway, Lucas held my hand tightly. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting soft light across the floor. I realized then what this battle had truly cost and what it had given me. For so long, I believed I was protecting my son by hiding who I was. But in doing so, I'd allowed others to define me. I'd let silence speak for me, and silence is often misunderstood. What I learned was simple but profound: respect built on assumption is fragile. Respect built on truth and integrity is unbreakable. 6 months later. Daniel completed his parenting and co-parenting courses. He was quiet, humbled. Judge Ellison reinstated unsupervised visitation. He never remarried. He never again questioned my ability to raise our son. My mother sent a handwritten letter, ink smudged from tears. I never wrote back. Some apologies come too late, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because trust once shattered doesn't always mend. Today, Lucas proudly tells his friends, my mom is a Supreme Court justice. He now understands what justice means, not just in laws and courts, but in life. He knows that people who love you can hurt you, but that does not define your worth. Telling the truth even when your voice shakes is still stronger than silence. Integrity is not loud, it is consistent. As for me, I stopped hiding. I no longer downplay my accomplishments to make others more comfortable. I teach my son that hard work, humility, and courage are worth celebrating, not concealing. The woman who walked into that courtroom, tired, misunderstood, alone, was the same woman who walked out. But the difference was everything. Because for the first time, I wasn't just serving justice, I claimed it for myself. I never thought I'd have to defend myself, not just as a judge, but as a mother. If my story moved, you please leave a comment below. Tell me what you would say if you were standing beside me in that courtroom. Your words matter more than you think. And if you believe no one should fight this kind of battle alone, hit subscribe to stand with me in the next chapter. Remember, never let anyone silence your truth. Protect your dignity, set your boundaries, and never be ashamed of your strength, even when it makes others uncomfortable.